Legs, rotaries, wheelers. These have been covered so far, and now it is time to round off Robocraft movement parts for as far as the PathForgercraft balanced model proposal for Robocraft 1 is concerned. In the form of the comment sections of the community, I have been reaching out to yourselves, the player base, so that you may share your thoughts and discussion on the matter, and perhaps a more transparent and healthy situation can arise. If I receive sufficient feedback, then I will cover such as its own separate entity. These discussions remain open. I shall be linking these and shall also at some point be linking a further community post where I outline the directions that I would like to take aerofoil and booster parts forward, and hopefully also outlining my thoughts shared by you, the community, even if that should nudge these parts down a different path. With that out of the way, let us go over aerofoils and boosters. In terms of aerofoils in Robocraft, one finds wings and rudders. Wings have been cynically been referred to as flying wheels, which is not an altogether unfair description. Aerofoils in general enjoy vertical takeoff and landing capabilities, and do kind of behave like wheels that can fly. They are responsive and fast air movement parts able to fly across the battlefield in two directions, forwards and backwards, and are also able to steer towards the left, right, up, down, and all directions in between, relative to themselves. Wings are not supposed to be capable of strafe movement, but do have a limited ability to strafe. Furthermore, one could activate sideways driving to enable keyboard inputs to overcome camera control's inclination to turn a bot towards a camera's facing direction. Be warned, however, that doing this can result in a bot's back being treated as its front for resultant back-to-front driving. And this is bad news for most builds, and is the main reason why I do not have sideways driving active on most aerofoil bots. Aerofoils on bots tend to be very stable with strong self-stabilization built into them, and so such, a bot rarely needs to unflip itself using the F key. Wings have flat hitboxes that are often shorter than the models suggest, and most tiers enjoy multiple connection points on the one end of the wing. They are very light of weight, and aside from an agility carry mass, they also have an optimal carry weight. The other kind of aerofoil, rudders, have many similarities to wings. They look smaller, but their hitboxes are more or less similar to those of wings. They have the same agility carry mass that wings have at the moment, but a much lower optimal carry capacity. In terms of base speed, they presently are also as fast as wings, and I hear rumors that this will shortly be changed to be higher. They have a lower speed boost, and this was not always the case. That's aerofoils. And now we come to boosters, or speed boost parts. These parts are primarily intended to provide a bonus to the base speed of other movement parts, more so than other movement parts already do in themselves, while also having their own impetus. One form of booster would be thrusters, and thrusters are one-directional rocket boosters that propel a bot in a singular given direction. They have the one connection point and have a modest amount of health. The other form of booster would be propellers, and propellers exert a driving force in two directions. These are tougher parts overall and feature multiple connection points, lending further to their durability. That covers the pure movement part bots, although pure speed boost bots do not particularly exist. So let's begin looking at the hybrid movement part configurations that one may find with these parts. In the case of wings, the most common accompaniment would be rudders, the properties of which improve overall plane mobility depending on the orientation in which such are installed. Hovers would be the next most common pairing, and this results in a plane that gains full strafing capability near the ground. However, the combination can result in more sluggish flight, especially while breaking through the hover ceiling. Sprinter legs would be next, almost invariably complemented by hovers and rudders in any of a narrow variety of bot types termed as sprinter planes. The sprinter leg's main contributions come in the form of providing fast turning while on the ground, and in the form of brief but significant speed boosts while sprinter leaping. Such builds tend to fly rather poorly, however. Wheels are rarely included, but when they are, it is typically in a cosmetic capacity, such as landing gear, although there is a little potential to serve as backup movement should the build become grounded. Skis are a modestly more popular inclusion as they are much lighter than wheels. Still, they tend to be used for cosmetic reasons as landing gear. Tank tracks are just as rare an inclusion. They are just too heavy to incorporate meaningfully even with their multiple connection points. Well, that covers wings. Similar is true of rudder hybrids, although they do tend to take a backseat to wings in most hybrid builds. Drones are a bot type within which rudders are more common than wings. But drones are commonly associated with thrusters, and this brings us to booster parts. If there's any particular bot type that thrusters are associated with, then it would have to be drones. Once upon a time, several years back, drones were in a position of relative dominance, but then their strafe capabilities were severely nerfed and they struggle to this day. However, not all kinds of drones require that kind of strafing to be effective, and this brings us to Tesla drones. These are fast and, thanks to their hover inclusions, are also able to strafe very well when near the ground, which is where most Teslas prefer to hunt. And one more drone-like build that I would be amiss in failing to mention would be the thruster sticks, a very niche kind of bot with control characteristics that closer approach those of an older Robocraft, but not quite, and typically have durability issues. In the case of propellers, they are a more common inclusion among non-Tesla drones, their strafe capability not being limited in the same way as the capabilities of thrusters have been, so regular drones dependent on props for their strafing are less uncommon. For similar reasons, they can also be a good inclusion on ski bots, upon which booster parts, with the help of camera plus tilt configuration, tend to serve just as much of a part in making such bots controllable. In truth, you will find booster parts on just about any build in their speed boost capacity. Okay, that covers wings, rudders, thrusters and propellers, as well as hybrids used in conjunction with these parts. Back to Digo Booster's master sheet of Robocraft part balance stats. As usual, I've linked Digo Booster's sheet in the description, as it is a very useful source of information about the full set of Robocraft parts. The actual stats for these aerofoil and booster parts are linked below. I will focus on the interesting aspects so as to keep things relatively short, though I will be going into some depth as regards aerofoils, although both wings and rudders have access to the same stat field, so that shouldn't be a huge issue. The first thing to note here is that aerofoils are movement parts that do not just have agility carry limit sets, but they also have optimal carry mass values. This is a big deal because while the light agility carry capacity is a singular value applied upon a per bot basis, the optimal carry mass is a value that is additively calculated on a per part basis. Both of these values determine how efficiently our agility values work. With those fields out of the way, we come to various speed fields: barrel speed, bank speed, elevation speed, rudder speed. Most of these fields appear to be multipliers of some sort, and yet the values for bank speed sticks out like a sore thumb, being far too high for a multiplier value and being statted to suggest a similarity to base speed in functionality. Curiously, bank speed presently shares the same values as those of the thrust-related fields, and VTOL velocity rounds this out. To go over these again, and with these values in mind, barrel speed and bank speed seem to overlap. After all, a barrel roll is a plane banking so far that it goes round a full 360 degrees. This is puzzling because it is not presently possible to barrel roll with controlled flight in the current version of Robocraft 1. In RC15, yes. Since bank speed seems more compatible with base movement speed, it might be the case that the base movement of a bot slows down while in the process of banking, but since these moments are generally short, most players do not realize that this is happening. Similarly, it would seem that elevation speed and VTOL velocity fields are also similarly connected, with the latter being the overall speed in the perpendicular direction from the orientation of the aerofoil. That leaves rudder speed and thrust to try and figure out and explain. Since the contents of the thrust field are compatible with base movement speeds formats, it could mean how much base velocity it imparts towards base speeds each second. Rudder speed remains, and it appears to me that this impacts the angular change that an aerofoil imparts upon a bot when the aerofoils rotate. Since these values for wings are set below 1.0, for a brief moment one wondered if exceeding the 1.0 mark might enable air loops, which would have been cool. But considering that rudders are set to a significantly higher stat and are not capable of barrel rolls, it is unlikely that this would have led to the hoped change in behavior. In case such should not be clear, much of this is speculation, and this lack of certainty is troubling in moving forward. With booster parts, we encountered the opposite problem. Things are much clearer, but there are also far fewer things that may be adjusted. Again, one finds the agility carry limits, and then one finds the spin-up time field, which is the amount of time it takes for a part to apply its full force toward accelerating a bot in a particular direction. As such, while it may take 10 seconds for a heavy propeller bot to apply its full force to movement, the odds are that it will reach its full speed significantly prior to that point. That is all that there is to be said about booster parts. Well, this was a roundup offering some insight into the back end of aerofoil and booster parts in Robocraft. The various fields mentioned are among those which FreeJam could modify. Mass, as per usual, cannot be changed to the best of my knowledge. As mentioned before, any asks of FreeJam concerning adjustments would need to be made with responsibility, as such can have far-reaching impacts across the game. Being transparent with one's reasoning is a start, and so that is a good starting point for me. Before I do get into sharing my thoughts on perspective balance, I would appreciate if you were to look upon wings, rudders, thrusters, and propellers and ask the questions. What role does this part play? Where might this part fit upon a given bot of various descriptions? How does this moving part measure up against others? Do these parts carve a niche for themselves? What issues, if any, do these parts introduce? As before, I would appreciate it if you were to be prudent with your thoughts. It is not about how you would like the part to serve you. Rather, it is about how the movement part serves the game, or at least about what would be in the best interest of the parts themselves. When this video continues, I will share my overall thoughts concerning the direction that I would like to take aerofoils and boosters towards. Do feel free to pause the video should you like to take a few moments to think about the balance of these parts without my influence. So, have you given this thought? Continuing in 3, 2, 1. Let me first say that approaching aerofoils was perhaps the hardest of the movement parts in total. This is not just because I do like my planes, but rather because in seeking to reassess and rebalance these parts, the path forward was the murkiest that it has ever been so far, due to an imperfect understanding of the agility fields of airfoils in general. Even so, I do feel that it is important to power through in an effort to leave a positive mark. I have mentioned my preference to clone parts in an effort to bring a greater diversity to the game. However, with regards to wings and rudders, it is less than clear as to how one could meaningfully do so. For a long time, there has been a desire to bring back old wings to Robocraft, wings without their own power, and able to perform the kinds of maneuvers that they were previously able to do. but I'm not sure if that is even possible given the present stats, the present agility fields with which to work. The wings would fight to bring themselves in line with the camera and self-stabilize again. Although, thruster sticks have at least partially overcome this through Tier 2 wings, having been given a much lower optimal carry mass than other wing tier types, which has had the result of diminishing stabilization effects. So, perhaps a cloned line of wings with higher health, lower optimal carry mass, and a greatly diminished or non-existent thrust might prove interesting, but only alongside the current wings, not in place of them. Perhaps similar could be done of rudders, and that would also be interesting. The only speed booster parts that might benefit from a cloning would be propellers. This would allow for a set of propellers that are primarily about health and impetus, good for drones and such, while the other kind of props could be about health and speed boost. But that was all about the potential of cloned movement parts. It is time to speak of the potential future of aerofoils and booster movement parts. So, beginning with aerofoils, wings and rudders in this case, as they're so similar, and it does make sense to speak of them in tandem with each other. As of the moment, wings are just great movement parts that I need to set my biases aside for, and ask what will promote balance while also not eroding that which makes the part enjoyable, and similar goes for rudders. In truth, wings and rudders are practically identical other than for their physical models and applied stats. It is perfectly feasible to make rudders behave identically to wings if one wished to do so. But what would be the point of that? In my view, it makes more sense to try and set these parts further apart in stats, such that they each would have a more solid purpose distinctive from each other's. This is less a matter of resolving a direct problem with them, and more a matter of adding character. To this end, in moving forward, I aimed for a situation where, relative to each other, wings would be tougher and have greater carry capacity, and would have better overall agility stats on the heavier end, while rudders would contribute more to speed and have better overall agility stats on the lighter end. Aside from the promotion of that duality, there are a few things that I would also like to address. Firstly, the restoration of a degree of the agility carry weights of these parts in exchange for reduced optimal carry mass. This would ease a situation where only a token number of aerofoils are inserted into a build so as to confer most of their benefits. Secondly, both wings and rudders have very similar CPU costs across the tiers, and this poses a value per CPU challenge similar to that which hovers had, or have I should say, running the risk of feeling quite samey across the tiers. To this end, as with hovers, I am opting to have lower tier airfoils be relatively tough, while promoting a better speed boost efficiency at the higher tiers. And speaking of speed boost, while addressing aerofoils, I am unable to resist restoring the rudder speed boost relationship with wings that the so-called balance patches server destroyed over a year ago without any complaint concerning their previous relationship nor any request from the actual Robocraft player community which they are supposedly representative of. Rudders have since gone through changes, and I do take that into account in rebalancing them for light and agility at the cost of fragility. Moving on to booster parts, thrusters. Here I may have one of the more controversial proposed changes that may initially annoy a number of players, and the reason that this is so is because I am touching CPU costs. I personally am not a fan of changing CPU values, but this is one of those areas that I feel that such would be more beneficial than not. There are several reasons why I'm doing this. Firstly, thrusters have a similar problem to both hovers and airfoils. Their CPU costs are too similar across the tiers, and this runs the risk of making them feel very samey. Secondly, and more importantly, ever since the super nerfs that thrusters strafe took, back in 2018 in an overly successful bid to reduce drone dominance, well, those nerfs were a little too successful, and the result is a thruster with a feeble ability to strafe. I strongly suspect that this nerf was hard-coded into the game, quite independently of agility values, which would make sense since those changes occurred before the current agility system was put into place. And ever since the disaster of 2021, it is no longer possible, as of this time anyway, to reach in and scale back on the thruster strafe nerf encoded. However, that isn't to say that there aren't means to, in some way, mitigate the strafing nerfs of thrusters, and that comes back to value per CPU. Some values cannot be changed, but the CPU it costs to get the value concerned can be changed. As of now, Tier 1 thrusters cost 10 CPU and are capable of lifting around 110 kilos of bot. That same thruster weighs 8 kilos, so it's more like 102 kilos of lifted weight in surplus to itself. See where I'm going with this? Well, the theory that I would like to test is that a reduction of 2 CPU to that thruster might make it more efficient overall. And while the actual thrust output of the thruster is not increased, the 20% savings in CPU could be used to pack in more thrusters. There are, however, two problems here, and one is that the CPU reduction would mean that existing drone builds would suddenly have extra CPU, which could be very annoying as regards drone builds where each and every nook and cranny has been packed with maximum efficiency in mind. Furthermore, adding more thrusters means a greater bulk in the builds concerned, and this may eat away at any gains. A second problem exists, however, and to this end I need to credit Sile for bringing this to my attention back before I got muted by the corrupt Robocraft 1 balance patch server. Well, testing that Sile had conducted in the past was suggestive that my theory is in fact mistaken, and that there would be very little or no gains gotten from drones having more strafe thrusters. In truth, I have very little reason to doubt his word, and it may be that strafe capability of thrusters is so restrictively encoded that the exercise I am proposing may be futile. However, there is always the possibility that there might be a way around this, and I do think that I may have the piece of the puzzle missing to add that which may make the exercise worthwhile. I speak of speed boost. Thrusters apply their speed boost in whatever direction they are facing, and this may be the key required to reviving a degree of the agility that strafe drones used to have. A further adjustment could be made, and this in the form of reducing low-tier thrusters' spin-up times. The way that spin-up works is that it determines how long it takes for a thruster to apply its force in a given direction. The adjustment could be made, although it is very likely to only have an impact upon heavier drones, most drones falling at or below the threshold for thrusters' light agility and spin-up. There is one more value that I feel is also worth exploring in trying to fix drone agility, and this would be the vertical takeoff and landing speed of rudders, the same speed that would be applied laterally when installed upon a drone. So that is something that's also in mind. This is not where the changes end, and here is where more players may become annoyed. In addressing the sameness and close proximity of the thrusters, I couldn't ignore the prospect of nudging CPU costs upwards for higher level thrusters. Okay, now that certain players have had a moment to take that in and calm down, it's not all bad news for high tier thrusters, as this also justifies a higher speed boost to CPU ratio than can presently be justified. Furthermore, I'm taking the whole speed boosters thing to heart, and making thrusters' primary purpose in life be to make things go faster. So once that the dust begins to settle and you get over that shock, and reconfigure the thruster setups on your builds, you may find that you would like the overall result, as you are able to get more out of those individual bulky thrusters. Before moving on to propellers, I do note that there is technically no reason why my proposal in this regard couldn't be partially rather than fully implemented, lowering the CPU of lower tier thrusters while not increasing the costs of higher tier thrusters. That could work. Well, anyway, that was the main controversial point of the proposal, and this brings me to propellers. Propellers apply their speed boost in two opposing directions and have significantly greater impetus than thrusters. They're also tougher. With this in mind, it makes sense to me to lean into what makes propellers desirable on builds, improving their toughness and responsiveness while allowing their speed boost to ease off a little. In this way also, thrusters and propellers would be further differentiated from each other. So that covers the proposed changes for aerofoils and speed boosters. By far the most controversial of the bunch, but I am thinking long term. This also marks the completion of coverage of Robocraft 1 movement parts for the purpose of the PathForgercraft balance model proposal. So that's all from me for the moment, and now over to you, the viewer. Did you come up with ideas concerning plausible directions that aerofoils or speed boost movement parts could be taken? What did you think concerning the proposals for aerofoils outlined here? How about the changes for speed booster parts? What impacts, if any, do you expect to see? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I will meet you there. And of course, thank you for watching.